Okay, it looks like we're streaming now. Yes, we are. All
Well,
right.
so uh, w- a resounding and heartfelt uh, 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 expression of thankfulness that all of you have signed on again, and that we're continuing this with this study. I have to tell you that I taught a lot of courses for the Wilmot Institute over about a 10-year period, and I had to actually start many of those courses from scratch because we knew we wanted to teach something about that particular Baha'i teaching or historical period, but we just didn't have any materials put together. And what happened in long-term courses is that we lost people. We'd lose people over and over again. Sometimes at the end of the class, there were only like a dwindling, less than 5 people left in the class. And I can already thank you very much for sticking with this, because it's really sticking with Baha'u'llah's writings that opens the door for profound understanding of what he's talking about. He's not done till he's done, okay? And it's very important for us to understand that when you read the Kitáb-i-Íqán, you want to read the whole thing, because the treatise as a whole has so much power and so much enlightenment to give to us when it's seen from the perspective of the whole. And I'm reminded in this of a statement by the Guardian that we must understand the Baha'i revelation is like a sphere. It's not a straight line. It's not a parabola. It's a sphere where different points in the sphere might appear to be contradictory, but when you put them all together in the sphere, you see that it is perfectly correlated. There are no conflicts. It's a completely self-referential model of reality, if you want to put it that way, because it's coming from one mind, the mind of the manifestation, which is, as we know, the mind of God. So this passage, there are some passages in the Gleanings that are quite similar to this, and there are some passages later on in the second part of Kitáb-i-Íqán that are also very similar to this. Not that it's necessary to distinguish between these different levels of discourse, but Baha'u'llah appeals directly to different facets of the human soul. Sometimes he's speaking in the language of rationality, of logic. Sometimes he's speaking in the language of experience, of shared experience, so that we'll be on the same wavelength as he is. Sometimes he shares a perspective that's based upon religious tradition, because religious tradition plays a really big role in how people understand reality, particularly metaphysical reality. But in this case, he's using his revelation here is in the language of mysticism. You could spend your whole life trying to logically figure out what he's talking about here. I don't think it'd be successful, but you let your heart be touched by these words and you'll get it. You'll understand. Upon the anemones of the garden of love. Yeah, that's what he's talking about. It bestoweth the mysteries of truth, and within the breasts of lovers, it entrusteth the symbols of the innermost subtleties. This is speaking directly to our hearts. And although physically, we know that the soul is generally speaking through and using as its primary means of communication with us. In other words, our souls are mostly through our brains. And when we talk about heart in the context of mystical experience, we're not talking about the heart, the physical heart, because our physical hearts do not have consciousness. They're a body part that pumps. And as long as it pumps successfully, we stay alive. But there is some correlation between the spiritual sense of the heart and the physical heart, because without the heart, we aren't alive. You know, there are plenty of people, as Mirza Abul Fazl said, I've read the Kitáb-i-Íqán 6 times in the spirit of rational discourse with my rational faculty. And then I read it in the spirit of faith. And it was completely different. All these meanings open up when our hearts are on fire, when we are submitting to this glorious manifestation of the word of God and of the will of God. So let's go, and this is very hard to talk about because it's directed to each of our souls. And if one thing we can be sure of is that although we can feel that the soul is engaged, we usually can't put into words what that means. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But I wanted to point out that there are similar passages both in the Kitáb-i-Íqán and also in the Gleanings that the Guardian translated on purpose. He wanted us to all know this mystical discourse of Baha'u'lláh, the way he's speaking when he's speaking to our hearts. So let's go on to 65. Now, again, if anybody wants to say something or ask a question, just raise your hand and Jeremiah will call on you and I will listen. So, I think you know, most of you, what this quote is, where it's from. This quote of, "And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven." The wording is a little bit different in the Gospels that quote this language. It's found not just in the Gospel of Matthew, also in the Gospel of Luke and Mark. The only Gospel it's not found in is the Gospel of John. John talks about the return of Jesus and the coming of the Spirit of truth that will lead us to all truth. He uses different terminology. And there have been all kinds of questions about why he would use different terminology. But one of the ways we can understand it is that the manifestation is not talking to one group of people. He's talking to all groups of people. And some people are of a certain rational perspective. That's their principal understanding of things. Others, it's sensory. Others, it's intuitional. And then here, he's speaking with those people who have had a religious education, because the religious education they've already had, they've encountered this quotation if they've read the Gospels. And it has been explained to them many times by their whoever they regard as the spiritual authority. And Baha'u'lláh, as he has made clear already in the Íqán, is that if you want to understand the true meaning of the word of God, you have to look at what the manifestations of God say about it. Your favorite preacher may not have a clue about what it means. And considering how many favorite teachers there are on the planet at any one time, especially with our rapidly expanding population, the diversity of points of view from a human points of view is beyond even calculation. It's so many, probably millions. And so which one of these millions is right? Well, of course, none of them are completely right. The one who is right is the manifestation. That's why we go and ask him questions. That's why one of our wonderful Baha'i months is named Masail. It means questions. This is one of the great things that we encounter every year in the faith, is that the days of our calendars, the names of our months, are reminders not just of the attributes of God, but of the attributes of the human being, of ourselves. And so I don't know if any of you have recently read the biblical statements, including, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. What I can be quite sure of is that you have never encountered a Christian author who interprets those words in this way. He interprets this as referring not just to the return of Jesus, not just to a specific manifestation of God, be it Muhammad, because he came immediately after Jesus, not necessarily just to the Bab, nor to Bahá'u'lláh. This is about all the manifestations of God. And then this is how he will explain it. And like, for example, he says this very interesting thing. He says, by heaven is meant the visible heaven. Really? Oh, wait a second. I thought all Baha'i interpretation was metaphorical. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. Because some things have meanings in this world and pertain to this world. And we need to recognize that. Like, for example, there's a law of the Kitáb-i-Íqán that says men must not shave their heads. So we're going to say that, oh, well, that's metaphorical. He doesn't really mean shaving heads. He means don't wear hats in public. Or, listen, religious people have been fudging it for so many millennia. It's like our predominant way of just interpreting scripture. It's got to mean that something to me personally. And so I'm going to interpret the verses the way they fit me. But no, this is a huge challenge. By heaven is meant the visible heaven, inasmuch as when the hour draweth nigh, on which the day star of the heaven of justice shall be made manifest. That's Baha'u'llah's extremely elegant way of talking about the arrival of the manifestation of God, every manifestation of God. And the ark of divine guidance shall sail upon the sea of glory. A star will appear in the heaven, heralding unto its people the advent of that most great light. Now, if you've read Thief in the Night, you know that Bill Sears spent a long, long time tracing physical phenomenon in the sky that signaled the arrival of the Bab. You know that because the book is all about that. That and other signs of his coming. But this is the thing that's really intriguing for us. This is something that's shared by every single religion. This is Baha'u'lláh affirming this. Every manifestation has been announced by some astronomical phenomenon. And for those of us who have been brought up to believe that the material creation is completely independent of the creator, and in fact, we don't even need the creator. We'll just keep evolving the way we evolve, and that's it. That's a perspective that's extremely it's been extremely convincing to a lot of people. It simplifies life a great deal to believe that everything comes from our developmental process. But here's this extraordinary statement for us moderns, that there's actually an astronomical announcement of the coming of the manifestation. But here you have it. Baha'u'lláh is saying it right here. And he says, don't try to interpret this away as being metaphorical. It's not. It's real. It's visible. It's physical, And then he says another thing, which is also quite astonishing, because he says, in like manner, you're going to have to scroll the text a little bit so that everybody can see the bottom part. In like manner, in the invisible heaven, what does that mean? That means in the spiritual worlds, a star shall be made manifest, who unto the peoples of the earth shall act as a harbinger of the break of that true and exalted morn. Baha'u'lláh is saying that there is a forerunner, a forecaster, who comes before every prophet of God. And we have that described very eloquently by the Bab, and especially by Abdul Baha, in some answered questions. But this is a statement of reality. As you were, this is the statement about the reality of the cause of God, of the religion of God. It applies to all the manifestations. We have so much to learn about what's going on with our universe, because we come from a culture which very carefully separates out religiously revealed truth from scientifically revealed truth. And yet Baha'u'lláh in this very statement is saying, no, they're completely correlated. There is one reality. It's not as if, you know, we can have a million perspectives and all of them are valid. That's really one of the functions of the manifestation, is to bring together everyone on the same page. And we're on the same page with science because we acknowledge that there's a process followed by science that is successful, that turns up results that actually are true. And Baha'u'lláh is challenging us to have the same understanding of religion, that religious teaching, the original teaching of the manifestations, not at all the interpretation of their followers, not at all even the translations of, in some cases, of those teachings, but the original teachings are stating facts about reality that goes far, far beyond anything we can understand with our senses and with our intellects. So I wanted to bring up this issue because Baha'u'lláh and Abdu'l-Baha have both indicated that one of the signs of the coming of a manifestation is being foretold or introduced by a celestial happening. Something's going to happen with the stars. Something's going to happen up there in the sky that's going to give us an indication of this happening. And secondly, that there's going to be a forerunner. Every single time there will be a forerunner who prepares people ahead of time. In the case of the faith of the Bab and Baha'u'lláh, there were many forerunners, not just one. The most important ones, Baha'u'lláh says right here in the Kitáb-i-Íqán, were Sheikh Ahmad Asai and Sayyid Kazim Rashti. But we know that other forerunners existed in other places. For example, those of you who have read Thief in the Night are aware that William Miller, who began to be convinced in the 1820s that Jesus was going to come back very soon. And he managed to attract literally millions of Americans to believing that it was going to happen on a particular date. He was a herald. He was the herald of the coming of a manifestation. Unfortunately, he didn't know where the manifestation was going to show up. He thought he was going to just come down from heaven and everybody would see him at the same time. And he did that because he had a literal understanding of certain biblical promises. But as Baha'u'lláh has pointed out in this text, those verses are meant to be understood primarily in a symbolic fashion. But sometimes they are manifested in the world that we encounter every day, in the physical world. So I wanted to, we don't have to do the questions because I'm answering the questions, but let's go on to the next paragraph, and I won't, I will invite your comments this time. Let's go, what is that, 67? Is that 67? Yeah, oh, good. Okay, who would like to read this one? It's a short one, so it would benefit from reading it.
I'll read it.
All right.
Among the prophets was Abraham, the friend of God. Ere he manifested himself, Nimrod dreamed the dreams. Thereupon he summoned the soothsayers who informed him of the rise of a star into heaven. Likewise, there appeared a herald who announced throughout the land the coming of Abraham.
Now, Baha'u'lláh is starting something right here. He's starting with verse 67 to cite instances of manifestations of God who have been announced by something in the physical heavens, in the sky, and who had a forerunner. And he's going to start with Abraham. He could have started early. He could have started with Adam. He could have started with Noah. But our understanding and our knowledge about manifestations that came before Abraham is quite limited. And so in his wisdom, he realizes, no, let's start with Abraham. We're going to now establish that this is a pattern that has occurred with every revelator, every manifestation since Abraham. That's a pretty long time ago. Most historians regard Abraham as having appeared around 1500 BC. So that would mean he is now 4,500 years ago. A good chunk of time. One of the things that we see in this, which is very interesting, generally speaking, the prophets are not very fond of what are called soothsayers, who are astrologers and mystics, and they use various means to predict things happening. And they're usually employed sometimes in great numbers by the king, because the king wants to make decisions that are going to turn out properly, and because he's very aware that his reputation as a king, and possibly even the continuation of his dynasty, depends on him doing the right thing. And so he's got these soothsayers who are hanging out with him. And generally speaking, prophets are not very fond of the soothsayers because, of course, the soothsayers are enemies of the prophets. As soon as an enemy a prophet actually appears, then they attack it, because he's endangering their livelihood, their authority, because the prophet is always saying, turn to God, and the soothsayers are saying, turn to me. I'll tell you what's going on. So in any case, the soothsayers, even though they were not trying to help, right? It's not in their best interest to help, to mere mortals to be ready for the coming of a prophet. Nevertheless, they have that skill. They were not entirely clueless. They were not entirely charlatan. This is, I think, an important thing for us to understand, that the manifestation, when they're critical of human beings who have an intuitive knowledge about something, it's not because they don't appreciate that categorically. It's because so much of the time, those very people assume that they have a leadership role to play, which makes them superior to everybody else. And that's simply, when the manifestation appears, he's the hub of reality. He is revealing what the truth is. As Baha'u'lláh says in the Kitáb-i-Íqán, this is the standard of God by which all other books and knowledge is to be judged. So, anyone have any questions about Abraham?
Excuse me. Who announced Abraham?
I don't know.
Okay, I hope that
I don't know.
I looked everywhere. I cannot
I don't
find it.
know. But you know, the closest thing I've ever gotten to it was, there is a Ladino song that I've sung a number of times, both in Israel and the United States. Really beautiful song. There's a great choral arrangement of it that I would sing. And in this Ladino song, it's talking about the sign that appears to usher in Abraham's prophetic nature.
Oh,
It was a revelation to me when I actually, translated the Ladino and found out what he was talking about. And so if this is rooted in Jewish tradition, that means that somewhere in the sacred writings of Judaism, we will find a story that talks about this phenomenon and applied to Abraham. Also remember that in all religions, besides the canon that was fixed in each religion, there's a huge literature that is non-canonical. It's literature that for various reasons, the priests and rabbis and ministers decided, no, we don't want people reading that. We'll read that, okay, but not them,
okay.
we don't want problems, because if they start having confidence in something that's in this other literature, we may have a problem on our hands. And as you know, in Christianity, by about 300, year 300 of the Common Era, basically all sects of Christianity, that means all different ways of perceiving things in Christianity, was destroyed. It was very deliberate. They wanted to have one way of seeing the truth. And the same thing did not happen as quickly in Judaism. Judaism has had always different factions, and they were wise enough to understand that live and let live. Don't try to destroy these people that you disagree with, because if you destroy them, that makes us more vulnerable to the people outside of our faith who are trying to kill us. It's called survival, when you're doing something with your friend and you find out that he's got some different ideas from you, that doesn't mean you tell him to go home. That's an outlandish idea, that just because you see things differently, you can't work with other people. So I suspect that probably the answer to this one is to be found in the non-canonical literature of Judaism.
So it wouldn't be in the Torah.
No, it wouldn't be in the Torah, and it would not be in the other two collections that are part of the Hebrew Bible. The Nevi'im, the prophets, and the Ketuvim, it means the writings. So all of the books that are part of the canon, right? That are recognized as being authentic revelations in Jewish tradition. I mean, surviving Jewish tradition to this day, do not have any reference to this. And neither do they have oh, by the way, something I'm noticing. Every time that Bahá'u'lláh quotes scripture, Bible, Quran, Hadith, in the previous installments of the text, I have tried to identify where that came from. I seem to have not done it for these verses. So I'm going to go back and do that sometime, probably this weekend. So next week, you will have references to anything I can find.
Okay.
Okay. And basically it's, I'm not trying to encourage you to rely on me. It's just, I'm trying to make it easier for you to appreciate what other sacred literature has to say about a particular point. And then the rest, if you want to go take it further, then please, we hope you will, and that you'll share your results with other people. Like here, there's a quote. This is the soothsayers talking to Pharaoh. A star hath risen in the heaven, and lo, it foreshadoweth the conception of a child who holdeth your fate and the fate of your people in his hand. Where does that come from? I don't know. I'll try to find out, and you'll see it next week. But regardless of where it came from, we must always remember that we do not have to confirm the truth of what Baha'u'lláh says. we already know he's the supreme manifestation. There's nobody closer to the truth than Baha'u'lláh. His is the most complete revelation that has existed to date.
Well, it is really interesting to learn what you're sharing with us, learn how to interpret these words in Baha'u'llah's, the way Baha'u'lláh is telling us to, and then read in the Quran and read in the Bible, the King James Version. And it just makes so much sense. It really expands these ideas.
Yes, and also what it does is it imparts a growing confidence and awareness of what it means when Baha'u'lláh says in Kitáb-i-Íqán, this is the eternal faith of God. This is the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. The Guardian did something very interesting. The Guardian makes a statement in the World Order letters that the Baha'i faith is not another religion. The Baha'i faith is the reconciliation, the purification, and the globalization of the religion of God that has existed since the beginning of time. And he said, no, you should call the faith the world religion, not a world religion. No, because the other ones are not world religions. You can count a huge number of Christians, a huge number of Muslims, a huge number of Buddhists and Hindus. Everybody else is smaller numbers. But none of those religions embrace the world. And the manifestations of God are not speaking to the whole world. They're speaking to a subset of the world that was going to take these teachings and put them into practice. But whether it's Christianity or Judaism or any of the historical faiths, they were not designed to bring together all of humanity, because how could you bring together humanity before there was technological advancement? Just think about it. You can't. I mean, remember in the 1500s, 15 and 1600s, you have people coming and discovering continents, right? And there are all those wonderful stories about the explorers who opened up the northwest provinces, who opened up the whole of the United States. Those people, they were Christians. They didn't know that those places existed. And so this was true of most of the world. Most people, their consciousness of the world is where they live. And it's only since the advent of the Bab and Baha'u'lláh that we have begun to understand that the whole planet is our homeland. And that's not it sounds nice. It sounds nice to us, but nice and revolutionary are two different things. It's revolutionary because it's going to change our consciousness permanently. In a century from now, our descendants are not going to think the way we do. They're not going to think, I'm an American. They're not going to think, I come from a Caucasian background, or from an African background, or Chinese background. That is not going to be the source of our identity. Our identity is going to be that we are all members of the Homo sapiens creation of God, and that we all live on planet Earth. And that's going to be the primary defining principle in our identity as human beings. That's really radically different from anything any of us have experienced in the past. And we know that it's only potential for us because we get drawn right back into our old identities all the time. And how could we not? Until there's enough people in the world who actually affirm this global identity and affirm it with their every action. So Baha'u'lláh does this wonderful thing. He does this all the time, by the way. He will start up a subject that really merits deep and detailed discussion. And then he'll says, oh yeah, but it wasn't really my intention to talk much about this. and if I was to talk about it, it would just like drag on, and it'd be too much. It's so kind and gentle of him, but it's also a challenge to us because we have to do the work to do that investigation. And so this is why we, the believers, are complementary to the prophet of God. The prophet of God is giving us homework, a lot of homework. And so here's a wonderful statement of that. Were the details to be mentioned, this epistle would swell into a book. And of course, what you say is, well, it's already a book. Kitáb-i-Íqán is a book. Actually not. It wasn't originally a book. It was a tablet to one person. It was a letter. And we're not accustomed to long letters anymore, but if you look historically, long letters were often sent until probably sometime in the early 20th century. So it's one of the benefits of being able to look back into the past, because there are so many letters that have been preserved that give us very clearly the understanding of people at that time and even how they were living their lives. Moreover, it is not our wish to relate the stories of the days that are past. It's not our wish to relate the stories of the days that are past. This is so beautiful. There's a passage in Gleanings that you can find. It's a passage about wisdom. And he says, be ye anxiously concerned with the problems, I think problems or issues of your time. This is always his challenge. Don't get so absorbed in understanding history that you lose track of the fact that you live here and now. And you need to be primarily concerned with the here and now in order for the cause of God to be actually transferred or transposed into action. And here I will read the next sentence. God is our witness that what we even now mention is due solely to our tender affection for thee. I'm sorry, but that just leaves a lump in my throat to think that Baha'u'lláh would so love a mere human being that he would reveal things specially for us. We don't need these things, but he's going to give the gift to us anyway, out of love. And then when he says in the Kitáb-i-Íqán, follow my commandments, or maybe it's obey my commandments, for love of my beauty. You see, he's calling for us to love him back. He's already shown how much love he has for all of us. This is a love relationship. And I think it's very important for Baha'is to open their hearts to this text as well as their minds, to really feel what it is that Baha'u'lláh is doing as a speaker to the heart. Let's go to the next. '69. Oh, somebody read this one because it's very succinct.
I can read it.
Okay.
In like manner, when the hour of the revelation of Jesus drew nigh, a few of the Magi, aware that the star of Jesus had appeared in heaven, sought and followed it, till they came unto the city which was the seal of the kingdom of seat of the kingdom of Herod. The sway of his sovereignty in those days embraced the whole of that land.
You know, those are not a lot of words, but this gives us a way to understand the gospel accounts of the birth of Jesus and also the Quranic accounts.
Yeah, that's true.
And we must not be distracted by something that might occur to us if we were just to look at this superficially. Well, I can imagine myself in my Picayune days when I was trying to find, where I thought that there might be conflicts within the revelation, any revelation. And then those would give me permission to come up with all my own nutty ideas and live my own life without following this guidance. It says, until they came unto the city which was the seat of the kingdom of Herod. Do the Gospels say that the Magi went to Jerusalem? So go read the Gospel of the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke, and you will find that the first place they went to was to Herod. They
Right.
went and they reported why they were in the kingdom of Judea, his kingdom. Why are we here? We're here to seek this child. And how did Herod respond?
Tell me.
Come back and
Yeah.
tell me all about it. Okay, come back and tell me all about it. So after they left Jerusalem, they went where? They went to Bethlehem. And Bethlehem is just a few miles down the road. Okay, they basically arrived at their destination when they arrived in Jerusalem, because it's just down the road. I lived in Jerusalem, by the way. So when I say that it's just down the road, I mean really physically. I mean, you can walk to Bethlehem, okay, from Jerusalem. And undoubtedly many people did in previous centuries and millennia. So, and this beautiful statement, the sway of his sovereignty in those days embraced the whole of that land. In the Gospel of Matthew, which is in some ways the most complete gospel, and it has more material than the others, the statement is made that Jesus repeatedly told his disciples, I am revealed for the guidance of the Jews. So go and teach the Jews this fact, the fact that their Messiah has come, and they must repent and they must follow God. And so initially his sovereignty was to conquer the souls of the Jewish people, of the entire people of that land. And by the way, this also included the Samaritans, even though the Samaritans were not on good terms with Jews. They have the same scripture, and they followed basically the same laws. But they had a squabble centuries earlier, and ever since then, the Jews had considered themselves, had considered the Samaritans as being impure, as being cut off from the main stem of Judaism. And so they wanted to have no association with them. Well, Jesus in the Gospels is reported to have gone to Samaria and taught the faith of God to the Samaritans. Even though he says, I am sent primarily to the people of Israel, the Samaritans are in the same land, my friends. They live in the same country. So you can't leave them out when your sovereignty is through the entire country. And by the way, he did another thing. He went outside of the normal bounds of Jewish culture and settlement by going to the other side of Lake Kinneret, the other side of the Lake of Galilee. He went to the other side. He taught his faith there. He healed people. He exorcised. He got rid of demons. wonderful stories about that sojourn. They're also not the Jewish people. They're another people, but there are people who are also part of this land. Again, somebody who really delved into all of the details and the traditions that are preserved in different religions, they will find that this succinct statement is completely validated in other sources. And this is why it was effective with the uncle of the Bab. The uncle of the Bab knew this. The uncle of the Bab was a well-read person, and he was very aware of the claims of the different manifestations that came before Baha'u'lláh, or in this case, the Bab. He understood what religious tradition was. He was not a mullah. He had not made the decision that he wanted to go into the service of Islam as a formal Islamic reader, but he had read. And so when, otherwise, if he had not read, if he was not learned, then there would be no point in Baha'u'llah's citing so many traditions from Christianity and from Judaism. There would be no point in it at all. He wouldn't be speaking to somebody heart to heart. He'd be just giving a lecture that's for everybody. Baha'u'lláh doesn't do that. He just doesn't. He speaks personally to each person. And some of us are ready for that speech, and some of us are not so ready for that speech, but he's speaking to all of us. But grounding every statement in a shared religious tradition. So, since it's almost Christmas, I think it's interesting for you to remind yourself that this idea that there's a star that heralds the appearance of Jesus is known to all Christians. It's one of the reasons why they see the birth of Jesus as miraculous. Another reason is because he was born to a virgin. And Baha'u'lláh already talked about that, right? So we should not be surprised that the Baha'i faith, in all of its writings, confirms the fact that Mary was a virgin when she gave birth to Peter. And this is an affirmation that is, again, it's another kind of revolution, because we are in a materialistic society where we don't believe in that stuff. No, it's not possible a woman's going to get pregnant by the Holy Spirit. What is that anyway? Can you describe it? What physical characteristics does the Holy Spirit have? It doesn't have physical characteristics? Well, then it can't be real. It's a fantasy. It's Avatar, okay? So if you want fantasy, go to the movies. Don't talk to me about reality. Yes, all of us have thought that way at one time or another, right? And we have to struggle with it, because we just limit ourselves by not realizing that when the manifestation speaks about reality, he's serious. He's serious. So let's go on to the next one. Well, here I reference the quotes. How good. So I don't have to do everything from scratch. So here Baha'u'lláh is doing something that you may not ever see in any writer except for Baha'u'lláh and the Baha'is. He's quoting from multiple scriptures at the same time, talking about the same subject. So when he talks about the religion of God is eternal in the past and the future, he's not talking this is not some sort of kumbaya statement of, let's just believe something that there's no evidence for it. No, there is evidence. There's copious evidence. There's evidence through every one of the revelations of God, every one of the dispensations. And this is what he's citing. And he's leading to something. What is he leading to? What is the design of this discourse? Think about it. He's trying to speak to the mind and heart of one man and of all men and women. That if you recognize a pattern in divine revelation, a historical pattern that has been manifested time and time again, when you encounter a new claimant to being a manifestation of God, you should expect to find the same phenomena. And if you do find the same phenomena, there's no reason for you to reject it. Look, not every Tom, Dick, and Harry has got a star that's announcing his birth. What Baha'u'lláh doesn't say is just as important as what he does say. He's correlating this appearance in the physical heaven with manifestations alone. You know, Alfred Einstein did not get that kind of announcement. You know, there was no divine press release regarding his appearance. There's not, human beings don't get that kind of honor. Only manifestations get it. Do you, are there any questions that you have about this particular paragraph? Sometimes we get held up by the difference of names in different languages. Now we know the daddy, the father of John the Baptist, was named Zechariah. We know because it's there in the Gospels. But how come the son is called Yahya rather than John? Because John in Arabic is Yahya. It's that simple, okay? He doesn't have a different name. It's just different in that particular language. And by the way, it's different in Hebrew as well. And so then it's interesting because this book, the Kitáb-i-Íqán, could be as effective at teaching about the succession of messengers of God and preparing for an understanding that the Bab is a messenger as well. It could be used just as effectively teaching Christians, except for one thing: it quotes the Quran. Because Christians for centuries, well, for 1500 years, have been convinced by their religious leaders that Muhammad couldn't possibly be a valid prophet. It's impossible. And this has, of course, set them at odds with Muslims. And so there's been this war between the two largest religions in the world, largest in the sense of numbers of adherents. And that war is still raging. And Baha'u'lláh has the one remedy for that fire, one remedy. And that remedy is to recognize that both of them are revelations of God and that they are progressive revelations. And you don't have to choose between one and the other, because there's a new one who has come, and he has clearly said he is for everybody. And this is really all of these citations that he's going to give about the manifestations, each successive one. This is a historical account here, is going to result ultimately to propose to this uncle of the Bab: if you accept that this is true about all the manifestations of God, then why do you deny that the Bab was a manifestation when he exhibited the same exact phenomena? When there was a physical star in the heavens and there was a forerunner, or in his case, two forerunners. It's a very convincing argument. So let us go to the next paragraph. So I'm sure that most Baha'is are not familiar with this Rusbi, later named Salman. That's not surprising because so many of the books that refer to this historic personality are written in Arabic. By the way, I've been trying for many years to find out how many of the really important books that are written in Arabic have been translated into English, and I've been very disappointed at how few of them have actually been rendered into the language. Some of them were translated into French centuries ago. Some of them have been very recently translated. So we have seen an uptick in the 20th and 21st century for primary texts of Islam to be translated. But as you can imagine, why would that happen in Europe or the Americas, you know, in previous centuries? We were at war. We were just, our job was basically to protect our children from ever investigating Islam. God forbid they should investigate that, because it comes from Satan. How could it be why? How could it be otherwise? Everything either comes from God or from Satan. So this is clearly from Satan. So don't read the book. So of course, if you don't want them to read the book, you leave it in Arabic, because how many people in the West actually can read in Arabic? Count them on the fingers of one hand. Very few. So if you want to learn more about Salman, or under his other name, Rusbi, there is some material out there, but long treatises, maybe not. If you find one, tell me about it, please, because I'm interested in adding to what Baha'u'lláh has revealed. He revealed all of these things in very, very succinct language. And as he said, if I went into detail, this was become a book. Any one of these statements could become a book easily. So let's go. I just want to say one more word about Rusbi and Salman, and that is that when we of the West, and for that matter, the people in the East and the South and the North, all those who have not been raised in the Christian tradition, when we actually learn about the details of the stories that are referred to here, it's going to be so confirming of our faith in Baha'u'lláh. It's going to be, because we've gotten such a bad education when it comes to other religions, and in particular Islam. And if we were to rely for our knowledge of the religion of Islam upon the behavior of the extremists who have now assumed leadership of many of the Muslims in the world, then we're going to be led in exactly the wrong direction. Muhammad did not condone the behavior and the attitudes that these people are living according to. And the more you read in Baha'u'lláh talking about Muhammad, the more you will become acquainted with the true Muhammad. The Muhammad who not only loved, but sought justice at a time when there was great religious strife. And, you know, Muhammad was a peacemaker, which is about the opposite, the most opposite thing that you can arrive at in comparison with Khamenei, the Grand Ayatollah of Iran currently, and all of his mullahs, or for that matter, the ISIL, the attempted caliphate of al-Baghdadi. These are really misguided people who just do not have a clue about what Muhammad is actually teaching. But you can't disparage them more than anybody else, really, than followers of other religions, because Christians have been just as clueless, not just about Islam, but about also Judaism. And then you think about how Christians behave towards Native Americans. And it's tragic. It's really tragic that so many of us human beings have, persisted in our waywardness because we didn't really study the words of the manifestation. If we had, then we would have become the harbingers of peace and unity many centuries and maybe millennia before. And now concerning this wondrous and most exalted cause, know thou verily that many an astronomer hath announced the appearance of its star in the visible heaven. Where? I didn't read that. Go do the research. You have to. If you really want an answer on that, I did the research many years ago, and then I just got sidetracked into other things. But what I did find was there was much more evidence that you could discover in existing documents than I had ever encountered in my life, whether in firesides or Baha'i literature of any kind. But remember, Baha'u'lláh is not just writing here. He's not just writing for the uncle. He's not just writing for the Baha'is of today. He's not just writing for his dispensation. This is a statement of reality that will be fully, how should we put it? Fully canonical. It will be regarded as being a great book of guidance for people for at least 500,000 years. Remember, because the Guardian said, and quoting Abdul Baha, he says, Baha'u'llah's manifestation, his revelation, is going to have an impact on all the manifestations who will appear for the next 500,000 years. And that's just, of course, it's mind-boggling, but it's a statement that you can't run away from, because we know that Baha'u'lláh said this. We know that Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi said this. These are cardinal teachings of our faith. And so if anybody comes to you and says, well, that's not fair, my religion is equal to your religion, the best response maybe is, after you have a cup of coffee together, is that, what if they were all parts of one religion? How about if all of the prophets came from the same source? And so Baha'u'lláh is not contradicting anybody. And he's not pulling rank either, because the manifestation is the abject slave of God. He does whatever God asks him to do. He is specially prepared by the Creator to be a pure channel for the truth, for the entirety of his existence on earth, and then to leave behind a book which will guide humanity. So here's the statement. Here's the point. As he says, he refers to Sheikh Ahmad Isai and Sayyid Kazim Rashti, those twin resplendent lights. May God sanctify their resting place. By the way, where's the resting place of Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim? I'll give you a clue. Muslims from Iran who believe in the 12 Imams go to this resting place on pilgrimage, some of them every year. It's called the Atabat. It's a region with a few cities in which can be found the tombs of most of the imams. So it's the holiest place that you could be buried if you're a Muslim. That's where Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim are buried. Of course, they're not buried in Mecca or Medina, because Muslims do make a distinction between the authority and the spiritual potency of the manifestation and of his followers. But they're all in that particular area. And consequently, who went to Karbala? Karbala is one of those cities. The Bab went to Karbala. Baha'u'lláh went to Karbala. The Letters of the Living went to Karbala. Because it does matter where people are buried.
So it's in Karbala?
Yes. Yeah, so I called it Karbala, but you know, there are differences in pronunciation between Persians and
Sorry. Yeah,
Arabs.
no,
Yeah, and Americans too. We like
I
to.
didn't know what
At
it
least
was.
I didn't say Karbala. You know, I'm trying to be culturally sensitive here. So he got to the punchline pretty quick, huh? You see, each one of these paragraphs was fairly short. And then he comes to this, and this is very short. But he's building an argument. He built one part of the argument, that they all have signs in the heavens and in the human world. Now he's going to continue extending that argument to other things. Because as Abdul Wahab was very fond of saying, especially to the American Baha'is, you need to study the proofs of the religion of God. You need to understand and relate to other people the evidence for the validity of this revelation. Don't expect that they're just going to take everything because you say it. Why should they? They should be introduced to the evidence that is presented by the manifestations, and that in some cases the believers have been able to elaborate on by doing good old-fashioned homework. So here we go, 73. Again, this is a kind of, whenever you see Baha'u'lláh saying something like this, you must understand that he's appealing to the man's brain, saying, okay, you see there's this pattern. First of all, he says the pattern exists. Then he shows the pattern: Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad. Then he says the same thing happened with the Bab. And instead of going on, he says, from all that we have stated, it hath become clear and manifest that before the revelation of each of the mirrors reflecting the divine essence, the signs heralding their advent must needs be revealed in the visible heaven as well as in the invisible, wherein is the seat of the Son of Knowledge. It's very, when we understand that there's a process involved here, and the process is actually it's adapting your speech to the way that human beings think. The way we think is, first you say, I'm going to prove this to you. Then you prove it, and then you see, now that I've proved it to you, you can acknowledge that it's true. And this is a manner that he uses a great deal in many of the tablets that are excerpted in Gleanings. He uses the same sort of construction. Not that he has to. Manifestation can say the sky is blue, or he can say the sky is red, or he can say there's no sky there really. And he must have been saying something true, because he's a manifestation and he sees all things. But he doesn't do that here. He's not challenging us to accept things just on faith. You should just believe in the Bab because I told you so. Kitáb-i-Íqán wouldn't exist if that was what he was trying to do. This is why when in all of the master's talks in North America, I once wrote a paper on this. I found out that the Baha'i principle that is mentioned more than any other is the independent investigation of reality. Because this is it. Each human being has to come to this understanding. And you can't come to this understanding if you have somebody just say, this is the truth and accept it, or you're going to hell. That hasn't worked so well, has it? Because if you're converted to a point of view, a true point of view, through coercion, through threats, then
Someone was detected at your front.
your acceptance of that truth that you've been taught is not voluntary. It's not voluntary, and no human being responds to coercion with wholehearted acceptance. If you have parents that are mean to you consistently and tell you to do things without ever explaining why, and you see them as being arbitrary, the chances are that you're going to find a way to get out of that house as quickly as you can, as often as you can, and that you're going to live a very different life from what your parents lived. And it's because you've been abused. God doesn't abuse people. The manifestations do not abuse people. They are loving parents. They give us what we need, even when we don't know that we need it, especially when we think we don't need it. So Baha'u'lláh goes on to the next one. All right, having established what the meaning is of the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. There was an abbreviated version because it comes from the Gospel of Mark, where it's a shorter text. But this particular quote, again, I will find the exact gospel reference for it. But in any case, here he's going to explain what does it mean that all of the tribes of earth mourn, because it's not self-evident, and because that's had all kinds of erroneous interpretations in the past. For example, there are many Christians who believe to this day that until everybody in the entire world is ready for Jesus to come, he won't come. There are also many Christians who believe that when he comes, he will come in such manner that everybody will see him coming, and he will come in such manner that they will have no choice but to recognize him as the return of the manifestation. But Baha'u'lláh says that's impossible. Baha'u'lláh says God doesn't deal with us like that. We always have an out. In the Kitáb-i-Íqán, in the Loy Ahmad, the Tablet of Ahmad, you will recall this statement where he says, and I paraphrase because I can't remember the exact words, but he says, it's completely up to you. You can accept this truth or not accept this truth. And then he follows that up with a very important statement. If you reject it, you are rejecting all of the manifestations of God who have ever existed and all that will exist in the future. Because I'm telling you the truth here. You can reject it, but I'm telling you the consequences for rejecting the truth. There are consequences, you know? Look up the 34th chapter of the book of Deuteronomy, and you will see Moses' last speech to the people of the Israelites. And he says, when you come to this promised land, you either obey the commandments of God, in which case the land will flourish and your lives will be wonderful. Or he says you will disobey the law of God, in which case you will lose the land, you will be exiled from it, and you will suffer endlessly. Nobody has to be a genius to read Jewish history and see that that exact thing happened over and over. And In fact, the first assurance we have that it won't continue is from Baha'u'lláh. Because Baha'u'lláh says that one of the signs of the coming of the age of maturity of mankind is the ingathering of the Jewish people who will return to their homeland. This is one of the signs, he says. And it's elaborated greatly by Abdul Baha. So to go back to this, he's going to explain. Those words signify that in those days, the days of when the manifestation arrives, men will lament the loss of the sun of divine beauty, of the moon of knowledge, and of the stars of divine wisdom. Thereupon they will behold the countenance of the promised one, the adored beauty descending from heaven and riding upon the clouds. By this is meant that the divine beauty will be made manifest from the heaven of the will of God and will appear in the form of a human temple. Clearly not talking about the manifestation is coming back. Jesus is coming back on a chariot from heaven. You know, we're all going to see him. He's going to come down in his chariot. He's going to come down, and there's like all these angels surrounding him. And how could humanity ever have freedom of choice under those circumstances? That is mythological thinking. This is what the Greeks were so famous for. The same Greeks who basically birthed philosophy, critical thinking, science. Those same Greeks believed in these mythological tales about, you know, here comes Zeus, here's Poseidon appearing, you know, and they're doing all of these supernatural things that nobody's ever seen, nobody could see. Because if they did see that, then they'd all be, they would all acknowledge the truth. They would say, and they would fight back when they were taught monotheism. They would have said, no, you've got it wrong. We're polytheists for a reason. There's not one God. There's a whole celestial gathering of gods, and they all, each of them had their own function. And how do we know this? Because we saw them. Of course they didn't see them, right? But it's this insistence that you know something because somebody said they saw it. It's very much ingrained in human thinking, and so I warn my my friends who like to abide on TikTok. Be careful about drawing conclusions about reality from watching TikTok. You'll find tons of different assertions made, and most of them are, as the British say, poppycock. Nonsense. One of them recently was that the Simon, I've forgotten his last name, who is the chief judge of America's Got Talent, Britain's Got Talent, The Universe Has Talent. He's really big in these, well, he's the senior producer of those shows. There was a statement that that he had recently died, and so people believed it. You see, we tend to believe what people say, and Baha'u'lláh really is cautioning us: be careful who you listen to, and be careful about trusting the average person. They don't know any more than you do. They may know less. So let's go. I think he states this argument very clearly about what this means. Okay, and here also he's talking about the different meanings of heaven. All right, and that doesn't really require any explanation, I think, because it's just very straightforward to. And it's very interesting how he says this. How are we supposed to come to this realization, this understanding that he's revealing here, and own it for ourselves and say, yeah, I believe that. That's true. He says there's one requirement. wert thou to cleanse the mirror of thy heart from the dust of malice, thou wouldst apprehend the meaning of the symbolic terms revealed by the all-embracing word of God, made manifest in every dispensation, and wouldst discover the mysteries of divine knowledge. The essence of the message, in a sense, for humanity is purify your heart. You're never going to know the truth unless you detach yourself from all of the accumulation of ideas that you've received in your upbringing and that have been reinforced by your adult life. This is one of the reasons why religion is so difficult. Because it asks us to be to stop counting on and relying upon mere human beings and human traditions to guide us in the right direction. That's been our collective experience for so long. We just assumed that it's always been that way. And so when we encounter people who have sacrificed their lives for the cause of God, we think something's wrong with him. Why would you do that? Nobody I know would encourage me to sacrifice my life to advance a belief system. That's contrary to nature, they would say. That's contrary to everything we know about human beings. And yet this is what the manifestation is calling for. So he brings it back to this very controllable factor. We need not wait for anybody to do something for us to have this new concept, this new awareness of reality. We need only to do something to ourselves. And we can do that. If he told us to purify the mirror of your heart, he's not saying go get some surgery. Somebody needs to do that for you. You need a guru. You need a teacher. You need a psychiatrist. You need to depend on somebody who knows what he's doing in order to purify yourself. No, actually, that's not true. And not only is there nobody to turn to but God, but we are the only ones who can do it. And you think about your children. Maybe you could raise your children as Baha'is, but once they're adults, they're going to have to deal with this purification process all over again. Because surrounding them, everywhere they go, will be people who are reinforcing a concept of reality that is diametrically opposed to what Baha'u'lláh is talking about. It's judging all phenomenon based upon the material world. And not only the material world, but the material world completely divorced from spirituality. It's not the material world of let's say, many African tribes and Latin American tribes, even North American tribes, who see spirituality in all things. No, because they see spirituality. They're not denying the existence of spirituality. But we're in the midst of a culture that is going to deny that and say it's just an imagination. But Baha'u'lláh flips the scales by saying, your idea that everything is limited to physical world, that's a vain imagining, an idle fancy. You're limiting yourself. And step one, clear your heart. And then open to this knowledge coming in. There he goes. Not, however, until thou consumest with the flame of utter detachment those veils of idle learning that are current amongst men, canst thou behold the resplendent morn of true knowledge. Let's go to the next one, 76. First of all, do any of you, have any of you read this statement in 76? And if you've read it before, how did you understand it? And don't be shy. We're separated by thousands and thousands of miles. So, nothing bad will happen to you if you express an opinion. Go for it, Sharon.
Yeah.
Yes, well, for me, because I, a lot of this is in the gleanings and other places. So,
Yeah.
know verily that knowledge is of two kinds, divine and satanic. Okay, one is part of the soul's recognition and the walk of faith and confirmations that come through prayer, a life of service, a rectitude of conduct, a chaste and holy life, and freedom from all prejudice. And that burnishes the very important part, our repository. We are the repositories of this revelation. So we get to the stage where that is put within us. Now, it's not vain imaginings, because it's actually from the Kitáb-i-Íqán. It is actually from the stated mandate given to us from this faith in all manner of things. And it is the divine touchstone. Everything else that doesn't conform to that, we could honestly say with all fairness that it's vain imaginings, because the dividing rod for all truth in regards to us as Baha'i whānau is that touchstone of the guidance and the laws that we're given, and they are our safe path. It doesn't mean we don't fall and have tests, but that's our safe path. Any path, anyone else that's coming from where they're coming from without being under the canopy or in the arc of that, we could look at as being perhaps vain imaginings, and even in some cases done for power trips and ego. That's just a little snippet of some of my understanding.
Wonderful, Sharon. Does anybody else want to talk now? So I'm going to assume that if somebody doesn't jump in and interrupt me, that you're allowing me to speak again. So, okay. By the way, I just wanted to reference that statement, is that when my family used to get together for Thanksgiving and then also at Christmas, we'd have like 30 people sitting around a table, and they're all talking simultaneously. And that's sort of my understanding of what a family reunion is that we are so excited to see each other that we can't stop expressing ourselves. And that's, at the time, it was very difficult for me to understand what anybody was saying, because I have ADHD, and so I have to listen to one person at a time, but it was glorious. It was like listening to a symphony with all these different instruments playing at the same time. And I understood that it's all coming from a place of love and this need to communicate with other people whom you love. So to relate that to here, sometimes we have this feeling that divine inspiration is very distant. But Baha'u'lláh has told us over and over and over again, I don't know how many times, in many of the prayers, in many of the passages that the Guardian translated, that we are being guided by divine inspiration virtually all the time. And that the whole purpose of bringing yourself to account every day is to recognize where you fell off the train. All right. Oh, I forgot who I am. I forget what I believe. I forgot what I know is the right thing to do. So you got to watch out next time to not forget. Forgetfulness is a human capacity. It happens a lot. But this statement is actually very similar to something that Jesus is reported to have said in the Gospels. He said, you cannot worship two masters at the same time. He said, you can either worship God or you can worship Mammon. And he said, Otherwise, he will love one and hate the other. It is impossible for that to happen. The human being is not designed that way, because we're designed with the knowledge and glorification of God as our purpose. And that consciousness is about one thing, God, because God is not, there's only one God, and there's only one human soul. And so to speak of these two kinds of knowledge, one is divine and one is satanic, is also to speak of consciousness. This is why in both the Baha'i writings and in Christianity, there's this notion of the second birth. The purpose of the second birth is to awaken to divine knowledge, because without the second birth, if we were not reborn in the spirit, we don't know what's divine. We don't have a clue. It just looks the same as everything else. And if you've ever been there on a search, and every book you read and every pamphlet and everything just seemed equally reasonable, equally potentially true, you're lost. You may be having a great time being lost, but you're still lost because you don't know what to trust and what not to trust. The revelation of God gives us a framework for understanding what's real and what's not real, what's good and what's not good. And this is so marvelous how he just puts it in this very stark language. The odor of these dark teachings, which have obscured the world, can in no wise be detected. The tree of such teachings can yield no result except iniquity and rebellion, and beareth no fruit but hatred and envy. Whew. This is very strong language. But again, the Gospels are full of it. Jesus says, the fruit of a bad tree is bad fruit. The fruit of the good tree is good fruit. We have a certain consistency. It's not like human beings are constantly doing equal amounts of good and bad. That's not true. Most people are trying to do good all the time, and they simply have to improve, and they try very hard to continue to improve over time. But we're not all doing bad. None of the people probably in this group has ever done something that was so bad that they spent time in prison. Nobody here has done something so bad that they went insane. Well, some people think I'm insane, but I mean, apart from me. Most people that we encounter are good souls, are living good lives to the best of their ability. But this is a new dimension to be aware of where the good comes from. The good doesn't come from inside of us. It's not that we're built to be angels. We aren't. We become angels because we follow the manifestation. That's how we transform our entire beings. As human beings, we become divine beings. And this is a profoundly democratic teaching, even though on face value, it might appear to be anything but democratic. You might say, well, so if there are two kinds of knowledge, that means there are two kinds of people. There are people who have divine knowledge and people who have satanic knowledge. And so they come into existence by two different forces. Wrong. This is such an important principle, because Baha'u'lláh says that the person who does not have divine consciousness is the person who is not under the influence of the manifestation, who's not being taught, who is turned in a different direction. But that doesn't mean he's turned in the direction of a positive entity, an actual entity. The devil is not running around in heaven trying to tempt us. We succumb to temptation because we're not working hard enough to acquire the divine. And when you use the symbolism of Satan to describe anything that points you in the wrong direction, then you become aware that it's your responsibility and that you have to do something about it, not somebody else. And that, of course, God is there to help you, and the angels are there to help you. You notice many passages in the Gleanings that talk about teaching the faith. Everyone that talks about teaching the faith says, what do you have to do before you teach the faith? Purify yourself, live by the Baha'i teachings. You cannot teach anybody unless you're living by the Baha'i teachings. And then the second thing he says is, if you do this and you carry out your divine commandment of teaching, the angels of the concourse on high are aiding you. This is a promise. This is a fact. We're connected with all these great souls who've got our backs, but we have to do the homework. If we don't do the homework, if we don't try the very best we can to live according to these teachings, and if we don't raise up our voices to promote the faith, then we shouldn't expect that a tremendous enlightenment is going to occur. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. We have to take action in order for it to materialize. And that's what the fruit are. So let's go on to the next one, where he's going to reiterate the same teaching. By the way, Baha'u'lláh does this a lot. All the manifestations do this. They repeat themselves. And you say, oh, well, you already said that back in verse such and such. Why do you have to say it again? Have you done it? Are you living according to it? Did you understand what he was saying? He knows. He knows we have to hear things many times. He knows we have to read the scriptures many times over before we get it. Not everyone, but most people. Certainly me. I've had to read the scriptures over and over and over and over. And I first encountered the faith at age 19, and I'm 69, 50 years ago, and 50 years of going back to the scriptures. Yeah. And I see stuff now that I didn't see 10 years ago, 20 years ago, certainly not 50 years ago. I just didn't see it at all. It just it whizzed right by me. But that was because I wasn't receptive. I wasn't like a sieve that's been put in the water to go catch fish. My sieve was full of holes. The fish got out. All right. I didn't collect any fish. And then for many years, I thought I'm just a bad fisherman, so I guess I'm not even going to try. But it is, there's a passage in the Gleanings. He says, all that with which you have been endowed can only be manifested through your willful action. Now, I'm paraphrasing, but if you look for that concept you will find it in the Gleanings. Baha'u'lláh is saying very clearly, do it. Even when you don't know whether it's good, even if you have no comprehension of whether it's going to make any difference in your life, do it. I'll point you for a passage that's in Gleanings that's quoted in many prayer books, where Baha'u'lláh says, chant every day the verses of God. He says, though you may remain unaware of its effect, sooner or later, you will have this consciousness of what the divine word does to the human soul. Don't give up. Never give up. So what's going on? I'm trying to look for the text, and now it's disappeared.
Yeah, Peter,
Yep.
we need to go ahead and close up for this evening, and we'll just pick back up on next week.
Okay, good. Well, friends, where did we leave off? What number was it?
77.
77.
So we'll pick up on 77, and we'll just redo that one. That's
okay. And then Meanwhile, I want to say, I think about these sessions and what we're looking at in the text frequently during the week. And if you find yourself not just reading, but having questions or wanting to express a certain point of view of any kind, I want to make sure that you understand that I have an email. So you can share those things with me during the week, anytime you want. I will actually be really excited and happy if I receive an email from you, because then it's not just because I know you're studying the text and you care about the class, because there are plenty of people who will never write me, but I know that they care about what we're doing. But it will simply give me that joy of being then able to share with another person about something that Bahá'u'lláh has revealed. It's such a pleasure. We should never regard sharing our thoughts with our fellow Baha'is as a burden to anyone, either to ourselves or to them. It's not. It's a blessing. Okay. Have a wonderful week, everybody.
I put your email in the chat window for everyone in the group just to make sure everyone has it. And I think they do. And I appreciate your time, Peter. And I appreciate everyone else who joined us this evening. And I hope to see you all next week as well. Have a good night.